a professional practice you usually need to pay for. So Illustrator is a great tool to learn. All right, so to continue, I am going to remind you how to take your refined sketch, which is the first thing we post for assignment 4. So if you go to assignments, scroll down to assignment 4, and where we post it, right? It says after proving ground number 2, the first thing we post is our refined sketch. That's the first requirement. The refined sketch should not be outlines, right? It should be solid black shapes. Solid black shapes. Solid black shapes. And what you'll see when you see those solid black shapes, like Hannah, that when you squint, sometimes you might have to, when you make the vector, like thicken those borders, right, between them. But if you can squint and you can still see all your content, then you're good. And when you squint and it's all outlines, first of all, outlines are really hard to make in Illustrator. It's much easier to think of it in terms of shapes. So this is going to be better when this is all filled in with black. And I've actually worked with Remus on this, but I'm going to just use this as an example. So let me save this. So if you need to refine your sketch to make it into black shapes, this is what you do. You open it with Photoshop. This can be your favorite sketch from Proving Ground number 2, or some new refined sketch that you made after combining what you tried with Proving Ground number 2. And all you're going to do is take it, and then you're going to use what is called the paint bucket tool, which you'll find under the gradient tool in Photoshop. You're going to use the defaults, and you're going to paint with black and turn these into black shapes. And that's all it takes. Now you can see that this reads as black shapes. Now, if you wanted the stars to be cleaner, right, we could even use the shape tools. And the custom shape tool, and it's crazy they don't have stars built in, but we can make it with triangles. It's up to you how much you want to mess with your refined sketch to make it kind of a clean example. But the truth is, it's very easy in Illustrator to make star shapes or make clean shapes, right? What you need to know is how thick are your black shapes and what shapes are they. So once you have that, then you just save it as a JPEG. So you save a copy, just a simple JPEG. PNG would also work. Bring it to the desktop. And then we're going to open that file up in Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator 2025. Okay, so now how do we set this file up? You'll see under Layers that this file comes in as a raster image because this is indeed pixel-based. If you zoom in enough, you'll see the pixels. This is not a vector, but this is our sketch our plan for our vector. So what we do is we double-click on that layer. It gives us these layer options within Illustrator, not Photoshop. And we're going to dim the images to 50% opacity. That's what we call onion skinning. In fact, I actually like to dim it. If you designed your refined sketch in pure black and white, like I've asked, I'm going to dim it all the way to 20% because it still shows up really cleanly. The next thing is we're going to lock that layer. So you'll see layers are not really layers in Illustrator. Layers are organizational groups. Why did I lock it? Because I don't want to start building vectors on the same organizational group where I have my raster sketch. My raster sketch is not going to be in my finished logo. If it was, then that defeats the whole purpose of making it a clean vector because rasters aren't scalable, right? So what do? I click on the little plus sign here, the little post-it plus, to make a new layer, just like in Photoshop, that layer is going to show the anchor points in red. Every time you make a new organizational layer, it will give you a new color for your anchor points, which is just a way of seeing them in the program. And red is the easiest way to see them. So your first layer, it would show anchor points in blue. I want you to have it so you can see the anchor points in red. Now I need to build my vector shapes. And this is like cutting out paper, right? It's not like drawing. So what do? I'm actually going to make the biggest shape first. The biggest simple shape first, just like when you made your emojis out of vector shapes. And does it make sense for me, if it's a perfect circle, to try to draw that with the pen tool? Let's see. You can start at the top. You can click and drag and try to get a perfect circle. Doesn't really work great. And then try to complete that on the other side. Yeah, that didn't work so well. I could adjust it enough so that would work. But the better approach for a simple shape is to use the shape tools, which are underneath the pen tool. And I haven't shown you the shape tools in Illustrator yet. But these should be very similar to the vector shape tools you used already in Photoshop. So I'm going to use the ellipse tool, and if I want it to be a perfect circle, I hold down Shift, just like we did when we started our emoji. That will lock its proportion so it's a perfect circle. And then I can use my arrow keys and just line it up, put it right there. Now, when you make a vector in Illustrator, to deselect it, you use this small selection tool. It's called the direct selection tool. It's like the move tool in Photoshop, but it's white instead of black. The black selection tool selects everything and allows you to move it and allows you to transform it. You see the transform box, which is very helpful. But the direct selection tool lets you manipulate individual anchor points. And that's what's really going to matter as we're designing our vector. And Command-Z on a Mac to undo works really well in Illustrator. It would be Control-Z on a PC. Okay, now when I select it all, I can see the red anchor points. That does not mean that my vector has any red in it. That's just showing me the path and the anchor points with red. And you can see it here. Now, under this organizational layer, I have my first path. And it can be turned on and off with this eyeball. It can be locked. But what's important about each path, I can also select it here instead of selecting it with the tool within the image, is that each path has a property. And vectors have two properties. They have what's called a fill and a stroke. Right now, you can always see those in these two boxes. These are not foreground and background color like they are in Photoshop. Instead, it's the fill color and the stroke color. Now, this does not match the design I'm trying to make. I want it to be a filled black circle. And I don't want it to have an outline. So what do? I take that circle, I select it so I can see the anchor points, and then I am going to change these. I'm going to make the fill solid black, and I'm going to make the stroke not white, because I don't want white in my logo. These are black shaped logos. So I'm going to make the stroke empty with this red bar. That means no stroke. And now I have a black circle with no stroke. That's my first step. I'm going to lock that, turn it off. Now I'm going to draw a new vector, and I'm going to make a new layer, because this is going to teach you a really important skill that will apply for some of your logos, maybe not for all of them. I'm going to draw these shapes. But these are empty shapes, right? They're not white, but I'm going to draw them as white shapes now so that I can cut them out from that black circle, like cookie cutters. So, it's going to be in green. I'm going to use the shape tool, and I'm going to use the star tool. How convenient. And I'm going to make a star. And I'm going to hold down Shift to lock its access. And how do I change it from being black to being white? Actually, it doesn't even matter. I can just leave it black. but I would change it by changing the fill color. And while I'm building it, I might give it a stroke color as well. So I can double click here and make it a black stroke. Like that. And then under properties, I can say how thick that stroke is. So maybe I make it a 2-pixel stroke. And then I'm going to use the large selection tool, just like the move tool in Photoshop, to move the whole thing. And that gives me a transform box around it as well, which will let me rotate it or scale it or squish it. But if I like it, then I can actually copy and paste, because there are 2 other stars. So I use the large selection tool, I click on it, and I can drag it, put it into place. What's so frustrating about Illustrator is that you need to click precisely. So if I click anywhere other than the center here, if I click on one of these little things accidentally, that gives me a rounding tool, which rounds all the corners. That's because I'm on the black. I can do Command Z. If I had the white direct selection tool and I clicked on just one of those anchor points, like that, then it only allows me to manipulate that one or round just that corner. But I'm going to use the large selection tool, and I'm just using Command plus and Command minus to zoom in and out, and Command 0 will fit it all on screen. All right, so now I've got these 3 stars. They are white fills with a black stroke. I do not want that black stroke anymore. I need to turn it off. I just did that. Why is it still there? It's because I didn't have them selected while I did it. So remember, every time you build something in Illustrator, every new path is going to be a new layer. And it has to be selected in order to affect it. So now they're all selected. Now I can turn off the stroke for all of them, so that they're just white stars. Why is that helpful? Well, now this is the new technique. If I turn on both layers, it looks like what I want, but it's not what I want, because when I move it onto a gray background, I now have black and white shapes instead of just black shapes. So how do I make it just black shapes? Well, this is how. And this is the professional technique that amateurs do not know how to use for some reason. So learn this, it will be very helpful. You use what's called the Pathfinder tool. And it's under Window. There's nothing like it in Photoshop. The Pathfinder allows you to merge different layers together, or different vector paths, like we merge layers in Photoshop. But it also lets you minus ones from each other. Minus the ones on top from the ones behind. So what do I actually need to do first? This is kind of complicated. I need to select all 3 stars and make sure they're selected where I can actually see their anchor points in green, right? Then I have to merge them. Now they are merged. That's what's called a vector group. They're still separate because paths, unless they're overlapping, are always going to be separate. But now they're in a group. Then I select the one underneath it. Boom. So now I have the red path and the green path both selected, and they're both single selections. Now I can minus one from the other. And what that does is cut those stars out of the black. And now it's just one vector path. You can see it there. It's now green instead of red, because when you use Pathfinder, it's always going to merge them onto the topmost layer. Okay, now I need to do that exact same thing, but with a much more complicated shape, right? With that horse. So this gets to what I was demonstrating with my logo at the end of the last video. So what do? I turn this off, lock it. I'll work back on this layer, and I can move that layer up above. So now I'm going to trace this horse in red, and I'm just using my trackpad. This horse is a pretty organic